Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us today for the CREST Threat Intelligence Professionals Conference. Hopefully you've all had a chance to have a bit of lunch for those that have joined us after the break, and welcome to the newcomers that have joined us for the afternoon sessions. We still have sessions running throughout the afternoon. So we'll be starting with a great presentation shortly, and hopefully you can join us for the rest of the presentations throughout the afternoon. So just shortly before I hand over to your presenters, who are Robert Moody, System Engineering Manager at the Home Depot, and Bence Horvath, the Director of EY. They will be talking about CTI Analyst Guide to Threat-Based Prioritization of Security Improvements. And just before I do hand over to them, I just want to talk about the questions. You have a chance to ask them any questions that you wish to today. So please feel free to pop those questions into the question pane. You can put them in throughout the presentation, or you can pop them in at the end. So don't miss out on any questions that you do have to ask Robert or Bence whilst you've got them in this presentation. So with no further ado, I will hand over to our presenters. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, and welcome everybody to our presentation. Just a quick run through of the agenda for today. So we're really going to just give you a bit of introduction about our persons and our backgrounds. Then we're going to look at laying the groundwork and establishing organizational profiles, looking at the big picture, who's out there, who's willing to do us harm. We're going to talk briefly about modeling and building up attack and response scenarios, and kind of bringing in some war stories from our collective experience. Then last but not least, talk around risks and opportunities through the lens of risk reduction and lessons learned. And as Demi mentioned, we're going to leave some time in the end for questions that you might have. So please feel free to prepare them throughout the presentation. We look forward to a bit of a lively debate at the end of this. So without further ado, who we are, I'll let Robert introduce himself firstly.
Hello, everyone. Big thank you to the CREST team for having us on here. My name is Robert Moody. I'm a system engineering manager at the Home Depot. Specifically, I oversee the threat intelligence department. I've had a long career in cybersecurity, dealing with everything from digital forensics, incident response, legal projects in the US. I've worked in Spain, Germany, all over the place. So really happy to be here and presenting to you all today. I'll give it back to my co-presenter, Bence.
Thanks, Robert. My name is Bence Horvath. I work with EY. I'm one of the directors here in the team, looking after next-gen security operations and response, leading the UK side of that business. So without further ado, I would recommend that we start laying the groundwork for our presentation. And in order to be able to held everything together, we've decided to create a little bit of a case company, Acme Corporation, that is, although rooted slightly in reality, but it is not here to present any company that we would know, but a fictional company, let's say a UK-based global financial corporation established through a long list of mergers, acquisitions, divergence, and carve-outs. And from a business perspective, you know, again, they are an FS company operating in the US, UK, and generally Western Europe. So that's kind of the background of the organization, and that we've based the presentation around. So hand it over to Robert to talk about building up the organizational profile from a CTI perspective.
Thanks, Bence. So when we talk about building the organizational profile, one of the key components to doing any type of intelligence assessment is to understand yourself, to understand your organization. And for this, we need to understand why the organization is being targeted. What are the key business areas that this Acme corporation conducts themselves in? Why would an attacker be interested in looking at them? Because of the way in which they have their financial verticals. Where does the organization lie? What's the geographic regions in which it operates? Because different geographic regions have different threat actors, different geopolitics. There's a lot of nuance to understanding why attackers go after certain organizations rather than others. We also need to consider things such as the tools and technologies used to conduct business. What are the potential threat vectors? What can be compromised? How can you get into the organization from the perspective of a threat actor or cyber adversary? You need to understand who your first, second, and third parties are, your suppliers, your intermediaries, your subsidiaries, your clients. I feel today that everybody's favorite case example is the SolarWinds breach. That comes up so much nowadays. It consumes our lives as security experts, but the supply chain is something that's important to focus on and does help to build out an understanding of the organization's profile. Next slide, please, sir.
Excellent, thank you. So now we go over to establishing the big picture and looking at intelligence collection as our first point. So Robert, I'll let you continue.
Sure, thank you, sir. So when you start building out the understanding you have of your environment, you can then begin collecting intelligence on different aspects of it. So we have an example of an intelligence card around banking. This provides details of common attacks. There's lots of different sources you can look at, both OSINT and closed source. You start to understand the groups that operate in the regions that your business does and conducts business. You look at the actors who have historically attacked the sector, who have historically attacked the region, and you start to pull in details specific to those adversary groups and start to build your understanding of your threat landscapes. That you can then take that and focus inward a bit and start doing some threat modeling, mapping of risk vectors, watch lists of attackers or attack methodologies. Anything else you'd like to add, Bence?
Yes, I mean, once we're talking about actor selection, there are a few things that you can look at starting from that kind of actor profile as well. So you go from, and again, there are a number of tools, as you mentioned, out there that can go from the very, very wide sector profile to narrowing it down to actor profiles. But, you know, we really see attackers specializing these days. You know, you can really look at either from a vertical of business sector or geographical sector that attackers are targeting. So if you know that Acme Corporation is the one that you're working with or for, you can really look at, okay, who's attacking our competitors, what kind of threats they are exposed to, as you mentioned, who's operating in my backyard, who's likely to try and knock on my door as well, or is there something specific why Acme Corporation might land in the crosshairs of some of the adversaries? Are they involved in any sort of specific deals? Do they have anything out there about them in the public profile or the public eye that might raise the suspicion or ear of some of these adversary groups? And as we mentioned before, you know, this is the view of the attackers. If we're looking at the view, what is interesting about our organizations, we've mentioned already the crown jewels, the core economical functions or CEFs. But really, you know, why would an attacker be interested in attacking our organizations? We do see this as financial services company. Of course, there is money in there which an attacker could steal, but there's also a lot of personal information that an FS organization might hold. There's also a lot of business secrets, deals, pricing strategies. So you know, when you're dealing with an organization, you need to to, as a CTI analyst, probably open up a little bit your aperture and look at the business holistically, because there might be additional avenues or additional reasons why this company might end up in the crosshairs. So going over to the next slide, I'll hand it back over to Robert.
Thanks, Bence. So when we put together this case study and was really thinking of the financial sector and who are the groups that are commonly associated with attacks on the big names, the big players within the industry, we came up with a couple groupings. So we looked at TA 505, APT 29, Eastern European organized crime groups like the Finns, North Korean APTs, so Lazarus, APT 38, Hidden Cobra. We also started looking with a deeper focus on some of the espionage actors coming out of Russia, some of those that are operating out of Iran and China. And we tried to build out a holistic map of who would look to target a financial sector organization within the UK. And we built these out, and what's important to call out is however you want to go about sharing this information as a CTI analyst, you need to have a common lexicon so that you can share this information and have it easily digested by your other security teams, whether it's your red team, your blue team. You need to put the threat-based language in a way that they can understand and do something with it. Bence and I, we like to use the MITRE ATT&CK framework. It's constantly changing, it's upgrading, and they're portraying realistic attacks with confirmed instances of the TTPs. So that's why we chose that. We start to build our mapping and understanding of how these actors work and how they have worked historically, so we can have a really nice picture of the different attack sequences or attack chains that they've used in the past.
Yes, and another advantage of the MITRE ATT&CK framework is it really provides that lingua franca, that single common language and taxonomy across the organization, but also across multiple organizations. So really, it's a shout out to MITRE putting this together and enabling us to be able to converse, up and down the information chain internally in an organization, pivot from CTI teams to cyber defense teams, but also to be able to go out to partner organizations, go out to others in the market, or just use some open source intelligence and reports and be able to really quickly, make security and make CTI information actionable for our teams. So speaking of actions, let's go over to our next section, which talks about the scenario modeling for attack and response. And I'll hand it back over to Robert to talk a little bit about our overdriven super attack matrix for this case study.
Thanks, Bence. Yeah, the overdriven matrix. This is very graphical in display. All of the flashy colors, like I've heard people say that C-levels and execs love crayons, and this is what this image brings to my mind is crayons, and it's very colorful. But there's a deeper meaning to this. We applied compounding risk and basically a theory saying that the more a technique used by an attacker shows up in the wild, the higher risk it would present to your organization. And to get to this understanding, we took the MITRE ATT&CK matrices from the different groups that we mentioned, I think it was 2 or 3 slides ago, and started to overlay them to find commonality in the techniques used by these actors. So we started to overlay this, and as the techniques show up more and more in the attack chains that we're observing in the wild by these actors, it starts to gain a higher level of importance and risk from the perspective of a defense team. So you know that the dark purple or dark blue shaded in sections of the MITRE ATT&CK matrix, they have a higher level of importance to essentially set controls and privacy detection and response mechanisms to prevent these specific techniques from being able to successfully work within your environment. So we take a look at it from there, and we can start building out different NIST controls or other frameworks using a direct mapping from the MITRE ATT&CK framework to these security and privacy recommendations. Anything else you'd like to add on the slide, Bence?
Yes, maybe one more. As you and I were putting this together, we pretty quickly ran out of our original framework to just go with a reg rating and try to make it simple and use 3 colors. So we had to expand into the colors of the rainbows, or use all the crayons in the book in the box, as you mentioned. But it does give a more nuanced view of where do you need to focus your attention. And this is a really good view, in my experience, to focus internally, technical teams, how you can work with your either your SOC team or your cyber defense team or your endpoint security teams to focus their attention on specific techniques in the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. Later on in the presentation, we'll also talk a little bit about how you can bring a similar view to more into the risk language of executives and more non-technical people. But once you're able to complete a picture like this is really great intelligence. But how do you transform that into making it actionable? Now, of course, you can use a number of methodologies, and really we do believe that some of the good ones are around threat modeling, because all of this at this point is a number of hypotheticals. We're basing our intelligence and our information, of course, with certain intelligence principles, so it's not going to be completely made up as far as Acme Corporation is made up. By using the intelligence, you're able to develop these complex use cases based on threats, based on the CEFs that you got from the organizational view, and as a response to that, you're able to fuel the detection logic within the organization to be able to really catch malicious behavior that may or may not be following the exact intelligence picture that you developed in the beginning. But of course, we know that in many cases, especially a more advanced, more sophisticated adversary will not follow the exact same route as they've taken before, but they will generally follow the same steps and the same techniques as previously. So really, once you complete this picture, you're able to feed an organizational cybersecurity strategy. And Acme being a financial services organizations, they of course want to make sure that their customers' assets and money and information is safe, as well as their own personal and business information about their employees, but as well as their trading secrets are safe. So we got the context around, from a threat, risk, and control perspective, that 3-dimensional matrix, and it's really easy to feed into your threat modeling concept. So once you understand the threats, the threat identification has been completed, you do have your infrastructure, your architecture as well given from the organization. You understand data flowing through the systems, general threat modeling, which will then eventually feed your risk assessment. And all of this is, of course, ending up in a review cycle, because as well as intelligence, if it goes stale, it's just as bad as if your shortbread goes stale. It's just not going to be really all that useful, as well as the threat profile is changing. So we mentioned we've designed Acme as a corporation that's very active in the M&A markets. It might sell some of its assets, it might sell some of its parts or business units, it might acquire some new ones. So when you're working with an organization, you also need to keep in mind that the threat profile as you're looking at it might change, also from an organizational perspective, also from an attacker perspective. Anything you'd add in here, Robert, before we move on?
I think you said everything very elegantly. The only call out I would make is it's very an operational call out, and just in my experience working with security operations centers, this form of threat modeling and taking the understanding from the MITRE ATT&CK matrices, as well as all of the business context Bence just mentioned, can help you successfully transform your logging and detection. You can use this context to identify gaps in your sourcing so that you can better be prepared to respond to the threats that you're modeling against. It's the only call out I would have.
Thank you. And we've also promised to give you a little bit of an insight into how you can communicate this more into the risk perspective and to the controls framework. So again, a big shout out to MITRE, who's working with Attack IQ and some other folks over in the US to try and bring an understanding from the matrix of specific attacks and, generally speaking, the information contained in the MITRE ATT&CK framework over to the NIST CSF control frameworks. So this was just a little bit of an attempt for us to look at, 3 breaches and 3 really in the news, I would say attacks from kind of the past month. SolarWinds, as mentioned before, as a really important third party. The Hafnium one, which you can argue it's hitting all the sectors across, so it's not necessarily just a third party relevant to financial services, but goes across the board. And just out of random, we picked Ryuk as the ransomware for financial services. They do tend to focus quite nicely, so at least they're one of the very few ones who aren't opportunistically attacking everything that they can get their hands on. And from a controls perspective, we went back into the controls category and tried to identify and see, kind of what controls are really being impacted by these attacks. What are the really obvious ones that get hit, and from an organizational leadership or risk management perspective, you would really need to look at. Of course, monitoring will almost always will be in the middle of it, but there's also the detection processes, anomalies, asset management, and so on and so forth. So it can be developed into a very dynamic framework. I do recommend, if you haven't checked out John Baker's article on Medium around security control mappings. It's a really, really good way to start getting involved in this. MITRE has also put out a GitHub around this as well, where you can start feeding in the attack frameworks, as we mentioned in the beginning. If you got all of those already, you can start feeding them into really easy to understand Excels, and you will be able to get the control impacts out of it. And so with that, we come to the last section of our presentation around risk and opportunities. So when we look at this entire concept, we've also mentioned, of course, that in order to make it actionable, we are trying to make it as risk-based as possible. And I will hand back to Robert to just really quickly looking at some of the areas where we are weighing the risk and what are the considerations that we might put out in here.
Thank you, Bence. So when we take a look from the attacker perspective when weighing risk, we look at the likelihood of a targeting or attack based on the the actor or attacker profile. This is a qualitative assessment that an intel analyst would do. It provides some insights to the business to know whether this is a realistic threat or something that is really just theoretical. So we also look at the capabilities of the attacker. This has to do with the funding, training, what type of analysts they have. There's security teams that work on the the quote unquote dark side of cybersecurity. We also look at the attacker history and geopolitics. Does their attack history and what they operate within from a geopolitical standpoint, does that help to increase the risk that this attacker would look at our business? Then we look at the business profile. We say, what are our strategic priorities? Do those link back to the attacker? Would the attacker focus on us because of these strategic priorities, our CEFs? How about our future objectives? Do we have anything big in the works? Is there a reason that these attackers would shift gears and start focusing on us because of something we have planned for the future? And then organizational challenges. The best example of this could be what happened with the fast-paced digitalization of the world, which was due to COVID-19. Does this help to change an attacker's mind to focus on us? Do we have weaknesses created by these organizational challenges? And lastly, it's the victim profile. It's the victimology. It's the study of how the attackers choose their victims and what they do to them after attacking them. Is there exposure? Is there known enterprise vulnerabilities? Do you have things such as the Exchange servers open to the internet? Port 443, a lot of things that'll give you flashbacks to the Hardening comment that Bence made earlier. Is this something that an attacker can take into their attack sequence and leverage it for a short period of time? That helps to build out the risk that they would more likely attack us, being Acme. Additional intelligence, is law enforcement or governmental authorities telling you you need to be worried about this group or that group? They seem to be looking and focusing on you. These are things that you can pull in to help build a more robust picture of the risk that can be actionalized on your environment and your organization. Anything you'd add, Bence?
No, I think you covered everything quite well, and of course, you know, from your side of the pond in the US as well as here in the UK, we do have that additional component in the victimology, as you mentioned last time. So I do believe that, you know, law enforcement, but also, you know, the industry as a whole is quite good at sharing information. There are ISACs out there which helps us, being the quote unquote good guys, try and combat the quote unquote bad guys better. But this is really valuable information because, you know, if you know that there is a tide coming and it has already reached some organizations that you generally do business with or work in the same business space in, then this information helps protect, you know, us all. But looking at the time, thank you very much for all of your attention. And I think we've got a brief few minutes for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please let them come through to us.
Great, thank you very much, Robert and Bence there. Very interesting presentation. And we have had a question in, so I will put that one across to you now. So what open source and commercial tools do you currently utilize across Windows, Linux and Mac system during an incident response?
Robert, you want to take that first?
Sure. I'm going to take it from the aspect of cyber intelligence rather than incident response. But when building out the profiles, and again, this isn't an exhaustive list of the tools that my team likes using or anything like that. But from an OSINT standpoint, there are really good sources like Bleeping Computer, which is a blog. It's pretty quality information coming across. They're very responsive to the environment and what's happening. We also look at ZDNet as another OSINT. A really nice aggregator of OSINT reports is Malpedia. Really great. If you're looking more for a malware focus, you can look at abuse.ch's Malware Bazaar. They also have URL House as part of it. Those are really good OSINT examples. ThreatMiner is another one that has an aggregation of OSINT data. From a close-INT standpoint, in former lives, I've used tools such as Recorded Future, Silo Breakers, and quite a lot. And again, it's going to vary depending on your organization and what your organization has available, as well as what you're allowed to use in terms of OSINT. Bence, is there anything you'd like to add with that?
Yeah, I think, and again, if you are doing this a little bit from an incident response perspective or an after action incident response perspective, I do believe that a couple of the sandboxes that you're able to detonate, if you're able to recognize that you were under attack and you've contained it, but using that information and, also from the open source perspective, you got a couple of good sandboxes out there that you can find. Being able to look into it and understand, the specificities and specific, techniques or specific malware variants that are used against your organization because you already found it in your organization is a really, really valuable information. I've had that in my professional past as well, where we were able to recognize that we're being targeted by a specific APT because although we were getting hit by different versions of malware, which we were just throwing into the sandbox as fast as we could, we pretty quickly recognized that they're just going back to the same C2 domain. And because that C2 domain was in our threat intelligence providers list, we were basically able to steal the playbook of the other team and say like, okay, so this is how they attacked other organizations. This is all the changes that they're going to make into their malware variants. So it was a really interesting game that we basically already knew what the next versions are going to be of the malware variant before they hit us, just because we had that additional intelligence in the back pocket. So were there any other questions? Maybe I know we're
great.
basic.
Yep, I've got another one come in. So this one is, you spoke about a common language for CTI and referenced MITRE's attack. How extensively do you use, I'm not sure, is this STIX2 and TAXI2, given that these are now the UK government's recognised standard for CTI sharing?
I mean, it is for sharing and sharing the actual information, and we do use it quite extensively in our line of work. MITRE is more around the higher level framework that we're using to make sure that all the references, all the thinking when we're saying TTP, when we're saying technique, there is that general understanding, that kind of lexicon out there, or thesaurus, which can be used by different teams within the organization. So it's not so much as the sharing component what MITRE is good for. It's to make sure that we're all speaking English and none of us are speaking, well, I can go only from myself, but Hungarian.
That's brilliant, thank you. Is there anything that you wanted to add to that, Robert, at all?
No, I think Bence made a really good call out. It's the difference between sharing the technical information, which STIX and TAXI is an authoritative source and language to do so, and really the MITRE attack framework is more about being able to have those conversations internally and externally with other people, and it's less about the technical data and more about what's happening and providing that context about attacks and attackers.
Great, thank you very much. One of the questions that has come in is, are we going to get these sessions recorded, so for viewing later? So I'm sure they think that it's other people are going to really appreciate the presentation that you've given today. So just to let you know, these will be available on the CREST YouTube channel after the event today. So thank you very much. So unfortunately, we've come to the end of our session, but I do have some good news. This isn't the last time that you're going to see Robert and Bence today. So if you are signed up for the presentation that's at 3 o'clock, they will be talking about active defence scenarios, a quarterly exercise that promotes security posture and brings awareness for your CTI team. So as you've enjoyed this one, please feel free, if you haven't registered for that one yet, get on to that webinar. And then we've still got another webinar after that to finish our day. So thank you very much to Bence and Robert. Is there last couple of words that you'd just like to say to everyone?
Only 2 words from me. Thank you.
from my side as well, thank you for your attention. Hope you're going to join us for the next session in about 25 minutes.
That's great. Thank you very much. And thank you to everybody that attended the session today. And hopefully we'll see you later. So take care, everyone. Thanks. Bye.